Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're enjoying a pleasant fall afternoon. It's Sunday, a little after lunchtime. It's beautiful here in Arkansas, crispy, cool. This week's topic is back on the dissertation journey that you are all on to become researchers as doctors of philosophy and information technology. Part of your role will be to extend the body of knowledge and conduct original research. So we talked a little bit about this in Dallas. I'll go into a little more detail here, and then I've provided 15 or 20 links to probably hundreds of pages that you can read. You will have more on this topic in your program. Definitely. I'm just introducing some of these topics so that as you move forward through your coursework, you'll be able to approach it um, as a researcher, not as someone getting a master's degree. There's a difference. You're not really doing this coursework simply to master the topics. This is not another master's degree, though a lot of the writing I see would seem otherwise. You need to approach this entire program as if you're learning to be a researcher. So we'll get into that this week. Got a discussion question coming up. I'm eager to discuss these trends or these concepts with you further in class discussion. Let's see. We'll talk about what is research methodology, um, and then uh, the two traditions that research is broken into primarily, and then some things to consider as you move forward, and then we'll conclude. So, what is a research methodology? Well, I'm not going to make up the definition. I went out to several websites to confirm what I was taught. And it's really anything you do that takes you from the unknown to the known in a systematic way. You start with what you don't know, and you chip away at that. You chip away until you know. Hopefully, there is no more unknown, and we know everything about that, and we move on to something else. Methodology is the way you go about it, the philosophical framework you conduct your research in. Um, so, as I said, the research methodologies are generally broken into two traditions, um, quantitative and qualitative, although it is appropriate to mix those methods within the same research project. I was going to do a mixed method, but then I went with pure qualitative. But we'll get into more examples of those. So the first tradition is what most I think most I don't have the data to support this, but I think most computer science, information technology minded people tend to think in quantitative research traditions. You tend to think about gathering data and doing statistics on it and deriving some conclusion that proves or disproves a hypothesis, which is the traditional tradition of the quantitative tradition. Um, but there are some other nuances about quantitative research that you will come to understand. Generally, quantitative studies test against some sort of theory, or they attempt to extend a theory. You might even see some studies that are identifying a gap in a theory or a way that that theory can be used in research. Um, in the speaker notes of this slide, you'll find a link to a wiki that lists information systems theories. These are theoretical frameworks that have been used for many, 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 many research projects. Um, uh, and you will likely incorporate at least some discussion of theory in your dissertations moving forward. Now, subordinate to a research tradition, whether it's qualitative or quantitative tradition, you will find a design. They kind of subdivide, sub-describe traditions in the form of designs. I've provided some links on this. There's descriptive, experimental, quasi-experimental, or relationship-based research designs. Um, a lot of research-based design out there where you compare things. You may do an experiment. You may run some of you. I mean, some of you are expert software engineers. You may find a gap in the literature where you can test a new algorithm that you've been working on, or a new data structure, um, and you can experiment. You can run some artifact uh, program, and then change the scenario and run it again. Could be that you go from on-premise to cloud-based infrastructure and check the performance of that. There's a lot of ways that you can do experimental. Anyway, you'll learn, like I said, you'll learn much more about these methodologies, and you'll have to be fairly well versed on what these methodologies are and what they're used for, their weaknesses, their strengths, because you're going to have to discuss them both in your chapter 3 of your dissertation. You're going to have to justify why you used the research tradition and design that you chose, and you'll have to defend why you didn't choose others, why the others are less appropriate. And you'll find some my attempt at that in my dissertation back in the week 1 folder in my chapter 3, where I discussed why a phenomenological qualitative uh, study was appropriate to explore the phenomenon of knowledge loss in organizations with high levels of turnover. So you'll do the same thing in your chapter 3, and you have to know these things fairly well to be able to discuss them. Um, Third bullet here, quantitative studies do rely heavily on statistics, measures of um, the quality of your data, the reliability of your study, um, you know, all of those statistical measures of confidence. I'm not a statistician. I know at least one of you are a statistician. I believe you said you had a master's degree in mathematics, and you're working as a statistician. That is the furthest thing from what I do uh, for a living. But anyway, when you collect the data, when you develop your hypotheses, when you analyze your data, when you write up the results, everything is in the world of statistics. So if you're not strong at that, you may need to brush up on it if your research area tends to that. Um, but if you're already up on it, then hey, you're good to go. And quantitative studies, finally, they utilize very specific techniques to generate research questions and hypotheses. One of the sections of the discussion uh, board, the discussion question this week, is to reiterate your discussion question, or reiterate a discussion question that you think might be something that you want to examine. Um, so you might need to go back a couple of weeks where we talked about research questions and what makes a good research question. Some of the ones that were posted in class discussion that week were not research questions at all. They were just random topics thrown out there that would not be researchable or answerable or anything really. They were not research questions. So let's get better at that this week, okay? And actually post a valid research question, or at least an attempt at a valid research question. And then hypothesis generation, where I posted some links in here about null hypothesis testing and all of that. Quantitative studies often have uh, several hypotheses that they are testing. But then we move into the qualitative research tradition. I have a little more experience with this, having conducted one qualitative study, original study. I conducted interviews to explore, as it says in this first bullet, to explore and describe a scenario. I didn't collect numerical data that put a fine, statistically significant point on my phenomenon. You hopefully you've read parts of my dissertation. No one's asked me questions about it or brought it up or anything. But anyway, qualitative studies are often non-numeric. They describe things in terms of feelings, emotions, attitudes. Uh, they will describe things that are happening, just occurrences, without really necessarily putting a number to it. In fact, that's what kind of qualitative kind of means, is it's kind of the opposite of quantifying or putting a number on something. Um, Talks about the quality of stuff, but not quality as in like quality control or quality as terms of goodness. So if you're seeing qualitative, don't think quality control. Get to know qualitative a little bit more. Some of you uh, are in areas of um, of work where you might want to do a qualitative study, or you might want to explore something that lends itself to qualitative inquiry. They're used a lot in uh, social sciences, or like the social aspect of computing. Like if you're looking at a distracted behavior for mobile phones, like we did at the residency weekend, that there absolutely might be qualitative uh, uh, data to collect. Why do you look at your phone? It, you can't really put a number on that. I mean, you can do surveys and numerical analysis of Likert scales, but really it's getting people talking and then looking at the similarities. There's a whole school of qualitative data analysis. If you move in that direction, I can help you a little bit. I did qualitative data analysis in coding, and again, you'll get this in future courses. But you code people's conversations to find like similar phrases and words and concepts. But qualitative study, because it is somewhat subjective, and it's the researcher exploring a phenomenon. There are particular things to pay attention to in terms of validity that you'll get into if you do a qualitative study. And qualitative studies fall into one of there are others besides these, but these are the big four that you see in the literature. Phenomenology, which is just the study of a phenomenon. That's what I used. Um, uh, the phenomenon of knowledge loss as people come and go in an organization. But there's also ethnography. I could have done that. Ethnography is a study of a particular group of people. I studied joint military officers, or U.S. military officers in what are called joint organizations, and I described that concept in my dissertation, chapter 3. Well, actually, throughout the dissertation, but you're welcome to read it. My study population would have easily been described more as an ethnography than a phenomenology, but And then grounded theory, which I don't really understand. It seems to be where you're trying to develop a theory, but I see conflicting things describing grounded theory to me, and I don't like it. And then there's the case study where you find one particular scenario and you dive into what happened in that case. Um, so that's qualitative and quantitative analysis. But then there are ways to mix them within a given study that that depending on your approach and how you do it, it might be more valid. It might provide more useful real world information to do mixed methods. So you should pay attention to that. These first two I'm not real familiar with. Triangulation, uh, which sounds a lot like one of the third or the fourth that I'm familiar with, but you compare contrast statisticals with what you found in a qualitative, uh, or vice versa. Which again, like I said, I'm not familiar with this one. I found this as I was doing my research for this lecture. Um, I know a little bit more about triangulation in the form of different sources where you triangulate different sources of information. So that could be what they're talking about as a method to ensure validity. And then there's embedded mixed methods, which is using more than one data set, uh, which would be an interesting way to go about something to see how those two data sets compare um, towards the hypothesis or the findings in your analysis. The two I'm familiar with here are explanatory and exploratory. Explanatory is where you do like a quantitative study, or at least you collect some quantitative data, maybe a survey, but then you go back and you do some interviews with those survey participants to to kind of get to the why of what they put down. You gather more textual data to support some findings, or at least shed some more light on those findings. And then exploratory is where you maybe you know something, you learn something through interviews, and that exploration highlights a topic that you then go collect quantitative data on to conclusively describe what you learned in your qualitative phase. So again, just keep these in mind. They may be worthwhile um, as you move forward with your research project. So some things to consider um, is you want to try to avoid saying, I'm going to do a quantitative study. Because the research questions should drive the design. The way you phrase your research question can kind of drive the design. So if you're talking about, how and feel and attitudes, what are software engineers' attitudes towards a new programming language? How do workers perceive their own productivity using a given IDE or a given workflow tool or whatever? Um, so if you're starting to talk about attitudes and people and that sort of thing, it might be that you're asking a qualitative question. But then if you're asking something that's obviously quantitative in your research question, what is the uh, what is the relationship or maybe ratio. Again, I'm not a quantitative guy, so there are some things you don't want to ask as a quantitative research question because they're too easy to answer. Uh, what is the relationship between uh, certain demographics and um, software engineering productivity or mobile phone usage or whatever? So that's where you start to kind of collect data about, ages and gender and education level and income level and things that are measurable like that. And you start to measure them against, specifically numbers of hours spent on social media or a phone or uh, uh, measures of productivity at work or whatever the case may be. So you need to let the research question uh, choose your methodology for you. It could be that you find a quantitative study, say, um, that provided some data, but you weren't really happy with the discussion after the findings. You weren't really happy with the way the author went with the discussions. You might build on that quantitative study with a qualitative study of your own that would almost be kind of like a mixed method study, almost kind of, because you're building on a quantitative study by going out and asking why and exploring qualitative explanations for uh, what was found in that previous researcher's quantitative study. Um, so anyway, yeah, your questions that you're asking should drive your methodology, not the other way around. Another thing to consider is access to data as you are developing your research project. Just be aware that, uh, like interviewing people, I had to find 10 recently separated non-military people, recently separated former military people, so that I wasn't that to make my university happy, so that I wasn't interviewing active duty troops, and that caused me a little bit of a scramble to collect the data. Um, you might want to research something like cybersecurity, and the data you're looking for is classified, um, government, you know, secret data, or it's proprietary company data, and they don't want to necessarily release log files or incident reports or anything like that. So think about the data that will support your research project, and make sure you're not getting yourself into a more difficult situation than necessary. Um, and then another thing to consider is that whatever you're planning on doing will have to get university approval. So as you move through the coursework, particularly the coursework that focuses on research methods, uh, remember that the university is going to have to approve it, and those factors that Cumberland's is worried about will be brought to you in your coursework. But it's always something to consider. I had to worry about there was a moratorium on research within active duty military during my study, so I had to find retirees. Keep that in mind. Okay, so this week's discussion question is talking about research methodologies. And I hope if you're listening to this, if hopefully all of you are watching this, but I have a sneaking suspicion that very few of you actually listen to my lectures before you attempt the discussion question. Just judging by the stuff that I see on the discussion board that has nothing to do with the lecture. But hopefully this week something happened, and I'll be pleasantly surprised. Um, and you'll all take into account this lecture and what I've begged for here. I'm asking for you to write 3 short paragraphs in your research, in your discussion question. So please paste the following 3 bullets, these following 3 questions into your research, into your discussion question. Post them exactly as I have them here. Exactly. Paste them into a Word document so that you can use your bibliographic software to cite references, hopefully. So going back a few weeks to where we talked about problem areas and everything, please, 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 in your own words, describe an area of IT that you'd like to study. Tell us about why you think it's a problem, why you're interested in it, and be conversational about it. I know I'm going to see article spinner nonsense in here, but I'll keep going here. Okay, in the second second paragraph, what is your research question? That won't really be a paragraph. That'll just hopefully be just a sentence that ends with a question mark. A question ends with a question mark. Not every research question that we saw in our previous discussion board ended in a question mark. And then, based on that research question and all of the materials that I've provided you, and all of the reading that you've done, and all the preparation that you've done, and all the time you've put into this, what methodology or methodologies do you think would be appropriate to address your research question, and why? So I'm hoping to see conversationally and originally you talking about how you would go about addressing your research question, the methodology and the design, and why. And if you want to talk about why not the other one, please. This is the sort of thing that you'll go into in your chapter 3. So this is good practice for the 3rd chapter of your dissertations. And if somebody posts nonsense in their class discussion, please do not say, that was very insightful of you. You are obviously superior intellect, and I would like to add a few points, blah, 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 blah. Please treat this as an opportunity to discuss research methodologies. We'll see. We'll see. I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the light to come on. Every week, I get 2 or 3 people, 3 or 4 people that actually approach this correctly. We'll see. So in conclusion, I'm still seeing articles spinning literally within the last couple of days, paraphrasing word, just nonsense, just nonsense. I'm spending 3/4 of my time or more, 90% of the time, just going out and going onto Google or some other website and thinking, what is this? What am I reading here? I think a lot of you are still playing some childish cat and mouse game to try and get away with something, and you're asking to resubmit things instead of just doing this program and taking the time. It's very disappointing. I looked everybody in the eye in Dallas and asked for honest efforts, and I still got nonsense. So I'm very depressed at what I see, and when you turn in something that is depressing to me, I often wonder if you are considering the ramifications of what you are turning in and the conclusions about your character that I draw based on what you turn in. And there's a lot of that. A lot of this is about character and whether you have character or whether you do not have character. You are going to have to decide that for yourself. I didn't force any of you to to enter into a PhD program. But some of you are forcing me to tell you that it's inappropriate to cheat on your assignments, which puts me in a bad position. So I would beg you to stop doing that, and I guess I'll continue to beg you as long as I see it. So anyway, the second bullet, you will become much more familiar with these research methodologies as you write your chapter 3 and go through your coursework. Um, it, as you will have to, you're becoming a researcher. You have to at least have a conversational knowledge of these techniques and what they're good for and what they're used for. And you'll see this a lot if you read in the literature. Every article, every dissertation discusses the methodology. It's all over the place out there. Easy to find information about, really easy to understand, really, until you get into the complex math of the statistics, and then it can be kind of hard. But on the surface, these are not difficult concepts. So I shouldn't see really any need to spin or paraphrase or cheat. Learn a little bit about these things and write originally. Please, I am begging you. And as always, questions or concerns, you're welcome to email me. Please don't ask me to resubmit anything unless you can show me where the instructions were bad originally. If you cheated on something or didn't take it seriously, uh, please don't email me. Please don't ask me for pure mercy because I've told you at the beginning of this course, I'm not particularly understanding or merciful. This is a PhD program. You need to be putting a lot of time, almost all of your spare time, into this program. And I should see the results of that. And when I don't have a lot of patience, don't have a lot of tolerance, and I certainly don't have mercy or understanding. So I'm hoping to see good papers. I saw a couple that were not so great turned in already. I hope the quality improves as I go through the grading. I'm almost done. I posted your grades. Everybody got 200 out of 200 on the residency weekend group assignments. I like what I saw, and when I was able to go through and help you, um, the result was good. Some of you on your practical connection assignments turned in things that had absolutely nothing to do with the assignment, nothing to do with this course. And when you got a poor grade, oh, professor, please. And I just, what do you expect when you turn in something that has nothing to do with the assignment? When you get a spec and you're asked to write software and you turn in something that has nothing to do with the spec, do you expect, oh, well, you're forgiven. Yeah, try it again. No, you get in trouble. It's the same way with this coursework. So I wish you would all treat it as seriously as I'm assuming you do your work. So I look forward to the discussion on research methodologies and your draft research questions, and I look forward to helping you substantively and not trying to be an English professor or a detective to try and prove to you that you're not the original author of something that talked about taxation and globalization, just like somebody else who turned in the exact same paper. Okay, well, I'll see you in class.